to our south. We could see a few flurries around the state today, especially in the southern part. Heavier snows, though, will be to our southwestward. But we could see a little bit of sunshine, partly cloudy skies today. Not much of a bad day. Winds will be decreasing a little bit today, so wind chills won't be quite as cold.
Thanks, Pam, and thank you for joining us this morning. We'll have an update on all the news and weather at 7:25.
This is 5TV.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Joan Lunden. It is Friday, January 16th.
And I'm Charlie Gibson, up for David Hartman for the day. He is AWOL.
I guess so. It's good to have you here, though.
Nice to be here.
In this half hour, we're going to talk about the death penalty. It's been 10 years now since the death penalty was reinstated and convicted murderer Gary Gilmore was executed. But the debate has continued involving law enforcement and our national conscience. Where do we stand on capital punishment? In a few minutes, we will meet people for it and against it and an inmate on death row. Then a little bit later on, the story behind the dramatic recall of 250,000 Audi cars.
A lot of them. Also coming up this morning, Gary Hart, a name familiar to everybody, a former senator, a probable presidential candidate. And it seems a bit strange, but a presidential candidate has written a political thriller, a pot boiler. And he's going to be here to talk about his new book. Also later this morning, more than a year in advance, NASA has named the 5 astronauts who are going to fly the next space shuttle. And we'll talk to them about that and the apprehensions they may feel, and of course their feelings about the Challenger disaster. And actress Shirley MacLaine has a rather unusual part these days. She's playing herself in a new movie, and we'll be talking about that.
Right now, though, it's 1 minute past 7, and Barry Serafin has the news for us. Barry, good morning.
Good morning, Joan. Hi, Charlie.
Barry?
And good morning. Investigators say 2 men arrested in Europe this week may be linked to the June 1985 hijacking of TWA Flight 847. On Monday, authorities at the Milan, Italy airport arrested a Lebanese man carrying explosives. Authorities say he may be linked to another Lebanese man, Mohammed Ali Hamadi, who was arrested on Tuesday in Frankfurt. Hamadi is believed to be one of the TWA hijackers, and as John McWethy reports, the U.S. wants him.
After the arrest in West Germany, there was an immediate response from the United States.
We have notified the Federal Republic that the arrested man is wanted in the U.S. for air piracy, murder, and other offenses related to the TWA 847 hijacking in June of 1985.
We intend to do everything we can to bring him here to stand the trial on those charges.
The evidence that links Mohammed Ali Hamadi to the 1985 hijacking came from an abundance of fingerprints that investigators were able to lift from the inside of the plane, from drinking cups, washrooms, and windows. In fact, the evidence against Hamadi was so compelling that a federal grand jury more than a year ago secretly returned an indictment against both Hamadi and the other terrorists who helped him hijack the plane. The U.S. is handling this case in a very particular way. Instead of formally requesting that Hamadi be extradited to the U.S., officials are simply asking that he be turned over to American authorities without activating the extradition treaty. If brought to the U.S. under terms of that treaty, officials explain, it would vastly complicate efforts to ask for the death penalty if Hamadi were convicted. Officials say they want no such constraints and expect West Germany to hand him over without a formal request. John McWethy, ABC News, the State Department.
Former National Security Advisor Robert McFarland testifies before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee today on U.S.-Iranian relations. Meanwhile, ABC's Barbara Walters has learned key details of U.S. efforts to trade arms to Iran for hostages. In May 1986, McFarland and White House aide Oliver North flew to Iran, striking a deal with Iranians to exchange arms for 4 hostages. But Iranian negotiator Hadi Najafabadi told McFarland, "We will give you 2 hostages now and 2 tomorrow." North argued for the deal, but McFarland told Najafabadi, "I am under orders from the president to receive all the hostages at once." The U.S. delegation then left Tehran. The U.S., however, did eventually sell some arms to Iran, and 2 Americans, Father Lawrence Jenko and David Jacobson, were released. Also this morning, what appeared to be a hijacking today over India wasn't. 4 men commandeered an Air India jet, and security throughout India went on alert. But the apparent terrorists turned out to be government agents testing security. In Afghanistan, government forces and the Soviet troops backing them have called for a truce in the war with Muslim rebels. But thus far, the rebels have refused. Walter Rodgers is standing by now in Kabul in Afghanistan. Walter, what's the status of that truce?
Good morning, Barry. Western diplomats say that there have been violations of the ceasefire far from the Afghan capital in Karandar. Here in Kabul, the Afghan forces appear to be doing a very good job with the help of the Soviets of seeing that the ceasefire sticks. Although there was a very interesting development here just about 2 hours ago. For some reason, totally unbeknownst to us, and it came as a surprise to Western diplomats, Soviet armor started pouring into town, armored personnel carriers. They took up positions at strategic intersections and government buildings, and these Soviets looked like they had been called in from the countryside in a hurry. Their flak jackets were covered with dust, and it looked like they were ready for action. There has been no action that we know of, but it's very interesting that the Soviets, who you would think would stay out of town with all these Western reporters here, suddenly came flying in as if they expected trouble.
Walter, that goes to the basic question, I suppose, and that is, if the truce and all the various proposals and talk turned into something, could a communist government survive in Afghanistan without the Soviets?
Barry, this is a city which is very tense. The Afghan government has gone out of its way to give the appearance of normality. That being the case, there are still armed soldiers guarding government buildings all over town, and there are Soviets at the entrances of the city, north of the city and south of the city. That does not suggest a secure government if I look at the situation correctly. Barry?
Walt, are you being allowed to talk to the Afghani people themselves, and if so, what are they saying?
Well, I don't speak Afghani. I've talked to many Afghans through an interpreter. The most interesting incident that happened to me was this morning at a cultural demonstration. An Afghan walked up to me and in very good English cautiously said to me, "Are you Russian?" I said, "No, I'm an American." He said to me, "Oh, that's interesting." I said, "How do you like the Russians?" This Afghan man said to me, "I love my country, I don't like Russians," and he very quickly disappeared into the crowd. Barry?
Walter Rodgers, thank you very much. In Kabul, Afghanistan, there, by the way, on a Soviet press tour. In other news, the bodies of the 10 victims of yesterday's mid-air crash near Salt Lake City have now been recovered. All passengers and crew members of a commuter plane and a small private plane were killed in the collision. The wreckage crashed into a neighborhood, but no one on the ground was hurt. And the U.S. has ended an ineffective embargo against the Soviet Union. Stephen Ogg has details in this morning's economic report.
Good morning. The Reagan administration's decided a 9-year embargo on shipping oil and gas equipment and technology to the Soviet Union is hurting us more than them. So effective January 21st, the embargo is over. The embargo was imposed because of Soviet human rights violations. Commerce Secretary Malcolm Baldrige says the Russians are still violating human rights, but they can buy oil and gas equipment anyplace. And American firms have lost $2 billion in sales during the embargo. Meanwhile, another record day on Wall Street. The Dow rose almost 36 points to another record high on record volume.
I believe it's the outlook for moderate economic growth, stable interest rates, that provides a very good environment for a long-term bull market.
And the Federal Trade Commission has joined with state attorneys general to clamp down on the latest scam, telemarketing, using telephone watch lines to get consumers to buy shoddy goods or make bad investments by trying to convince them they've won a prize or a free trip.
In my office, in the 8 years that I have been there, this issue of watch line hustling, telemarketing fraud, has come from about the number 5 issue in terms of complaints to the number 1 issue that Arkansans call my office about and say, help us.
Finally, fourth quarter profits. General Electric up 14% because of good results at RCA, which it bought last year. But Hilton Hotels profits down 9%. For stockholders at a hotel chain, that news is not very sweet. Economy this morning.
Thank you, Stephen. That's our first look at the news this morning. Coming up at 7:30, we'll have a look at the life and career of Ray Bolger, who has died in Los Angeles at the age of 83. Now back to you, Joan Specter.
All right, thank you very much, Barry. And right now it's 8 minutes after and a lot of weather going on. I think I'll just let you go do it.
Weather is flexing the muscles today.
Whatever.
I'm telling you, time to bundle up. The West is experiencing a blizzard right now. The jet stream shows that same old dip we've been talking about for the last couple of days, with bitterly cold air spilling down into the southern Rockies and the southern plains. Big storm here, dangerous storm developing. It's wet down here in the southeast. This is the only mild area of weather today, and cold up in the northeast. Now let's take a look at the outlook, and here's the big storm. 10 to 20 inches of snow have accumulated already in some locations locations. Another 10 to 20 inches likely today, and the higher elevations of the Rockies as the storm rages on. Winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour. Southern Utah is having wind gusts of up to 90 miles per hour. The snow is spilling into the southern plains right now. There could be 10 inches in the panhandle areas of Oklahoma and Texas. Meanwhile, it's going to be rainy along the Gulf Coast, and although clear across the northern tier of states, it's going to be bitterly, bitterly cold. That's our winter forecast for today. Here's what you can expect in your hometown area.
We can expect another chilly day in central Iowa today. Good morning, this is Pam Dale from the 5 TV Forecast Center. Skies will be partly cloudy and there is a slight chance for some flurries. Our high will reach 20 degrees with northeast winds at 5 to 10 miles per hour.
And we'll have another look at the national weather picture in the next half hour. Charlie?
Spencer, thank you. Now 10 minutes after the hour. Tomorrow will mark a particularly dramatic anniversary in the long and often bitter debate over capital punishment in this country. Our legal editor, Arthur Miller, recently traveled to Utah, where it all happened.
This is a building where history was made. Inside, 10 years ago, on January 17th, 1977, convicted murderer Gary Gilmore said, "Let's do it." And that's when lawmen for the state of Utah did it. They strapped Gilmore into an old office chair and then fired a volley of bullets through his heart. It was the first legal execution in the United States in almost 10 years and had been made possible by the Supreme Court's decision a year earlier to restore the death penalty.
The order of the 4th Judicial District Court of the state of Utah has been carried out. Gary Mark Gilmore is dead.
After Gilmore, 67 other men and 1 woman have also been executed, and the number of people awaiting execution has quadrupled to more than 1,800, the highest in our country's history. The Supreme Court has left many questions to be resolved. Among them, what crimes deserve the death penalty? The Supreme Court says only those that take a life, not rape, for instance. Certainly, mass murder or killing a law officer would qualify. But what about death from a lover's quarrel or a robbery that ends in an unintended killing? Whom should we execute? Should women be as accountable as men? And how about juveniles? 35 people now on death row were under 18 when they committed capital crimes. 5 were only 15. How much disparity can we tolerate in the way the death penalty is applied? 42% of the people on death row are black, but only 12% of all Americans are black. And does it matter that killers of whites are more likely to be executed than killers of blacks? And look at the disparity of geography. More than 1/3 of those awaiting execution are in just 3 states. Meanwhile, 18 states and the District of Columbia have no one on death row or forbid capital punishment according to the Legal Defense Fund. Should we restrict lengthy appeals? Are 15-year veterans of death row making a mockery of the ideal of swift and sure justice? Yet, do we want to get too efficient in carrying out the death sentence? Would more frequent routine executions make us more indifferent to human life? But despite all of these legal battles, the fundamental ethical question remains unresolved. Is it right for a civilized country ever to put someone to death? One poll now shows that an astonishing 86% of all Americans favor capital punishment. But many thoughtful people still ask, when our society deliberately takes a human life for whatever reason, doesn't it degrade and dehumanize us all?
When we come back, Arthur Miller will discuss the issue of capital punishment with a U.S. senator, a lawyer, and a death row inmate.
Might be $2 or even $3 to rent a videotape that is due back the next day. At Major Video, our feature films rent for $3 for 3 whole nights. Think about it. Now you can rent tapes on Friday and keep them all weekend without any late charges. Major Video is only minutes away from you at Harding Road in Douglas in the new Harding Hills Center. Ask about free membership.
Attention! Now that Arlen has gone out of business, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of inventory is being sacrificed to the general public. No reasonable offer will be refused for any of Arlen's diamond and precious gem jewelry, and everything else in Arlen's fabulous inventory is being sold at up to 75% off Arlen's already discounted prices. No reasonable offer will be refused during the next few days. So hurry, before all remaining merchandise is sold to wholesale diamond dealers. Arlen's at 4094 Mill Bay Road, Value Mall, and Southridge Mall, Southeast 14th Street and Army Post Road, Des Moines.
If you have a fireplace in your home and would like to get more heat out of it, see the Turbo Pressure Custom Fireplace Insert at Betts Auditorium now. Let the Country Store of Ames show you how to keep your fireplace looking beautiful and yet make it heat. Your fireplace does not have to be ugly to be efficient. Look for this display outside of Betts Auditorium now and see the many different kinds of wood stoves offered by the Country Store of Ames. Stoves from all over the world like Cunara, Lopi, Hearthstone, Consolidated, Kent, and especially the Turbo Pressure Custom Fireplace Insert. See them all now at Betts Auditorium and feel the heat.
At Chuck Fletcher Ford, we're blazing in the new year. 3.9% financing or up to $700 cash back direct from Ford. 3.9 or cash back, plus no payments till May. Top Rangers from $59.99. Even Tempo just $66.66. Plus Bronco 2s with $700 cash or 3.9. Imagine 3.9 financing or up to $700 cash back, plus no payments till May. Today, exclusively at Chuck Fletcher Ford.
It's 16 past the hour. The debate over capital punishment concerns us all, but most particularly the more than 1,800 people now on death row. Roger Coleman was convicted of murder and sentenced to death almost 5 years ago. He maintains his innocence and his case is on appeal. He's with us from Mecklenburg Correctional Center in Virginia. Senator Arlen Specter is a Republican from Pennsylvania, a former Philadelphia district attorney and a supporter of capital punishment. Alvin Bronstein is the executive director of the National Prison Project of the American Civil Liberties Union and an opponent of the death penalty. Good morning, gentlemen. Good morning. Good morning. Mr. Coleman.
Yes.
You are opposed to the death penalty, but many people will say, of course you are. Your life depends on being opposed. Why don't you try and convince us why the death penalty is wrong?
Well, I'm against the death penalty for several reasons, but my major problem with it is it's irrevocable. If you execute someone and you later find out this person is innocent, it doesn't do any good to go to his family and say, hey, we're sorry. We're sorry doesn't cut it. And whereas on the other hand, if you have somebody that's in prison for life and 10 years later you find out he's innocent, well, you can't replace those years out of his life, but at least he's still alive. I feel that our criminal justice system is one of the best in the world, but it's not infallible. Mistakes have been made in the past, and mistakes will be made in the future. And if we execute just one innocent man, it's too great a price to pay.
Senator, you favor the death penalty, at least in certain circumstances. Why?
Because it is a deterrent against crime. The experience that I've had convinces me that it stops killings. When you talk about the 1,800 people on death row, they're very concerned about it. But so are 230 million Americans who are victimized by crime. There are more than 20,000 Americans killed every year with guns, perhaps 50,000 homicides generally. And for many reasons that I could specify, capital punishment, I think, is an effective deterrent. Stops killings.
When would you apply it? I'm sure you're not in favor of the death penalty for all crime.
I believe it has to be restricted to the most heinous and aggravated crimes. But if we apprehend the arsonists, if there were arsonists, in the Puerto Rican hotel fire, if we find people who have hijacked planes and put hundreds at risk or murdered some, if we bring back the man who was charged with the hijacking of the TWA plane, if you find a calculated contract killing where you have somebody who is a life inmate who murders a prison guard, we ought to use the death penalty in particularly egregious cases and where our experience shows us there's a calculation that it would have an effect on the conduct of others and save lives. I think that while we can't tell the precise number, a careful use of the death penalty saves many innocent victims.
So you wouldn't apply it to just heat-of-the-moment crimes of passion?
Arthur, absolutely not. And the reality is that if you talk about hot blood killings, if you talk about spouse killings or family killings or barroom brawls, hasn't been applied at all, say, from my experience as 8 years as district attorney of a city like Philadelphia.
Would it bother you if the death penalty were applied to a juvenile, someone who was 16 when the crime was committed, or to a woman, conceivably even a pregnant woman?
With respect to juveniles, I believe we ought to restrict its use if we are to preserve it. I think we have to use the death penalty very carefully if we are to retain it as a weapon against crime. Some 16 and 17-year-olds are pretty bad, but you have to have a cutoff at some point, and I think the traditional age of 18 is proper for juveniles. When you talk about women, women are equally responsible. I believe in equality under the law in all respects. If you have a pregnant woman, no, I wouldn't have an execution for a pregnant woman. The potential child, is not responsible.
Ms. Bronstein, you obviously, as does the Civil Liberties Union, opposes the death penalty. Why?
Well, first of all, on Senator Specter's point about deterrence, I've seen no evidence that the death penalty is a deterrent. To the contrary, the evidence seems to cut the other way. Canada abolished the death penalty in 1976. Their rate of homicides has gone down every year since then. They also imposed strict gun control at the same time. This country has the highest rate of homicides with handguns of any in the free world, 100 times greater. But that's because we have handguns here. So the solution is not to kill people, but do something about guns.
But the American people are in favor of the death penalty.
The American people want revenge. They want to punish people. That is true. I think they've been misled by politicians like Senator Specter about the deterrent effect of it. In 1972, the Supreme Court declared unconstitutional all of the existing death penalty statutes because they were applied in a capricious, unequal manner. It is still being applied that way. It is clearly reserved for the poor, for the black and the brown, primarily, disproportionately. People of wealth who get decent lawyers never get the death penalty. We randomly pick this person to get the death penalty and not that person at great human cost. If it's wrong, if killing is the most unacceptable of crimes, how can it become an acceptable penalty?
You believe it degrades us as a society. Yet we send people to war. We recognize self-defense as a legitimate use of death.
But that's a different kind of concept. In the death penalty, in the imposition of the death penalty, the state planning carefully kills a person. That, it seems to me, is more uncivilized than if Senator Specter were to go out and kill you. I mean, that's not as horrendous as Senator Specter's state planning, carefully executing a person.
Senator, how do you answer the argument that statistically it looks arbitrary, it looks as if it's random, it looks as if it's for the black and the poor?
Well, let me answer that, but there are some points first that I think require a little more attention. I don't think the American people are fooled by politicians. I think the American people are too smart to be fooled by politicians. If I'm one of the politicians, they're certainly not being fooled by me. The statistics go either way.
You just told them that it was a deterrent.
Wait a minute, let me finish. I didn't interrupt you. And I'm going to talk about a deterrent. And the statistics go either way and are meaningless, but let's deal in a specific case. Let me tell you about a case that I handled many years ago. And I can't make this too fast, Arthur. If you want to talk about this issue, it's not too easy.
Sorry, that clock moves.
Okay, I'll be brief. There were three young men named Cater, Rivers, and Williams in Philadelphia. One was 19, 18, and 17. The 19-year-old Williams had a revolver. They chose the 17-year-old because he didn't have... I'll be glad to come back. I'll be here.
We'll be back.
I used to be a lousy cook until I got a hold of Heinz 57 sauce. It's more than a great steak sauce. On the back of these bottles is my entire recipe collection. Great American meatloaf, sweet and sour pork chops. This is tangy chicken. Heinz 57 gives it a tangy flavor you can't get from any other sauce. With Heinz 57, even I can be a culinary success. Try